The morning sun, still a bit sleepy, was just starting to spill gold over the rooftops of Memphis. But inside Graceland, the day had been wide awake for hours. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was already deep into his whirlwind routine. It was a life that most folks could only dream of, a constant rush of music, fans, and flashing lights. But even kings had their schedules. Today was no different. The grand gates of Graceland, usually a silent, imposing sentry, were already bustling. Limousines, sleek and black as polished obsidian, purred in the driveway. Bodyguards, solid as oak trees, moved with quiet purpose, their eyes scanning everything. Inside, the air hummed with activity. Telephones rang, papers shuffled, and the low murmur of conversations drifted through the opulent rooms. Elvis, looking surprisingly fresh, despite the late night before, was in the music room. He had a guitar in his hands, not for a performance, but just for himself, plucking out a new melody he'd dreamt up in the quiet hours before dawn. He wore a silk robe, the kind that cost more than most people's cars, and his famous sideburns were perfectly sculpted. But even with all the glamour, there was a calmness about him when he was alone with his music. A touch of the country boy from Tupelo still lingering beneath the superstar facade. "Elvis, Mr. Presley, sir," came a voice crisp and formal, cutting through the melody. It was Colonel Parker, his manager, a shrewd man who saw Elvis as both his greatest creation and his most valuable asset. Colonel stood framed in the doorway, a cigar clamped firmly between his teeth, a stack of papers tucked under his arm. "We have that meeting with RCA in an hour, and then the photo shoot for the new album cover. You're running a tight ship today, son." Elvis sighed, a soft, almost inaudible sound. Put the guitar down gently as if it were a fragile bird. "Just a few more minutes, Colonel. This song, it's got something." "Time is money, Elvis," the Colonel replied. But there was a flicker of something, maybe pride, in his eyes. He knew that magic, the way Elvis could pull a melody out of thin air, but business was business. "The limo is waiting. We need to be downtown." Elvis nodded, already rising. The transition from private musician to public icon was seamless, a practiced art. He walked over to his closet, which was more like a small department store, filled with custom-made suits, glittering stage costumes, and an array of shoes that would make anyone's jaw drop. He chose a sharp navy blue suit, a crisp white shirt, and a tie that was just the right shade of blue to match his eyes, while he dressed Joe Esposito, one of his closest friends and a trusted member of the Memphis Mafia, laid out some files on a nearby table. Contracts for the Vegas residency are almost finalized. He looks like a record breaker again, and the fan mail is piling up. Got a letter here from a little girl in Iowa. Hammond. He never forgot where he came from, even if he lived in a mansion now. "Tell her I got it, Joe, and see if we can send her something special, maybe an autographed photo." "Will do." Joe smiled. That was Elvis. Always thinking of others, even in the middle of his own craziness. The next hour was a blur of activity. More phone calls last minute, discussions about tour dates, approving designs for merchandise. Elvis moved through it all with a practiced grace, a polite nod here, a firm decision there. He was the center of his universe, and that universe spun fast. Finally, it was time to leave Graceland. As he stepped out the front door, the sun was fully awake now, painting the sky a brilliant blue. The black Cadillac limo gleamed under its rays, waiting like a silent beast. Fans who always seemed to know when he was coming or going had already gathered at the gates, their faces pressed against the bars, cameras flashing. Elvis gave them a wave, a genuine smile, and a few lucky ones got a quick personal greeting before he slipped into the plush leather interior of the limo. Inside, the air was cool and quiet, a sanctuary from the noise. Colonel Parker settled in beside him, already on the phone. Joe Esposito and Red West. Another loyal bodyguard took the jump seats facing them. The driver, a man named Sam, started the engine, and the powerful car glided smoothly down the driveway, through the gates and out onto Elvis Presley Boulevard. Elvis leaned back, looking out the tinted windows at the familiar streets of Memphis. Houses, shops, trees. He'd seen them countless times, but today they seemed a little different. Maybe it was the quiet hum of the powerful engine, or the slight exhaustion that always came with being the king. He closed his eyes for a moment, just breathing, preparing for the next set of demands. It was going to be a long day, full of important meetings and endless obligations. He just hoped it would be a smooth one. Little did he know the universe had a very different plan for his afternoon, plan that would unexpectedly pull him out of his superstar bubble and into the very real heart of Memphis. The Cadillac limousine, a sleek black behemoth on wheels, glided through the streets of Memphis with the quiet authority of a king's carriage. Inside, the atmosphere was a mix of quiet efficiency and the low hum of conversation. Colonel Parker was still on the phone, his voice a low rumble. Joe Esposito was going over his schedule, occasionally muttering to Red West about a logistical challenge for the upcoming tour. Elvis, however, was mostly quiet. Staring out the window, he watched the familiar city unfold. South Memphis, where brick houses stood close together, where children played in front yards and where the scent of barbecue sometimes drifted on the breeze. He saw people going about their daily lives, a woman hanging laundry, a man polishing his car, kids riding bicycles. It was a world away from the dazzling lights of Las Vegas or the roar of a stadium crowd, and sometimes Elvis missed it. He missed the simple rhythm of ordinary life. Sam, the driver, was navigating expertly, taking them down a tree-lined street that was usually a quick shortcut to their downtown destination. The ride was smooth. He began to brake. "What's the holdup, Sam?" Colonel Parker barked, pulling the phone away from his ear just long enough to glare at the back of Sam's head. "We're already behind schedule." Sam's voice, usually calm and steady, had a touch of hesitation. "Looks like a procession. Colonel funeral, blocking the street ahead." Elvis shifted, leaning forward slightly. He could just make out what Sam was talking about. Up ahead, the street was indeed blocked. A slow, somber parade of cars, all with their headlights on, was making its way down the road. At the very front, a hearse draped in flowers moved at a snail's pace. Behind it, a line of black sedans, then a few personal cars, all moving with a quiet dignity that signaled a moment of profound sadness. "A funeral?" Colonel Parker grumbled, his face a mask of annoyance. "Can't they go another way? This is ridiculous, Sam. Find an alternate route now." "Colonel, the entire block is closed off," Sam explained patiently. "Looks like they're heading to the church just up the road. We can't get around them without driving on the sidewalk, and that's just not right." Joe Esposito looked up from his papers. "He's right, Colonel. This is their moment. You don't interrupt a funeral procession." Red West nodded in agreement, his expression serious. "No, sir, not in Memphis. People here respect that." Colonel Parker huffed. "Respect is one thing, but time is another. Elvis has commitments. We can't just sit here all day." He looked at Elvis, expecting him to back him up. "Well, Elvis, what do you say? This is costing us valuable time." Elvis, however, wasn't looking at the colonel. His gaze was fixed on the procession. He saw the hearse. Yes, but more than that, he saw the cars behind it. He saw the people. He saw the raw, palpable grief emanating from them, even from a distance. He thought about his own Mama Gladys and the pain of losing her. He remembered the quiet, respectful way funerals were handled in his hometown. It wasn't about schedule or inconvenience. It was about honoring a life, saying goodbye. "We'll wait," Elvis said, his voice soft but firm. There was no room for argument in his tone. He looked at Colonel Parker, his eyes holding a quiet authority that brooked no debate. "We're not going to rush this, Colonel. Not today. Sam, just pull over to the side out of the way and turn off the engine." "Give them their space." Sam, visibly relieved, nodded and did as he was told. Powerful limousine, which had been vibrating with suppressed energy moments before, now settled into a hushed stillness on the side of the road. The air conditioning hummed faintly, and the only sound that permeated the silence was the slow, rhythmic crunch of tires from the funeral procession. Colonel Parker glared, but knew better than to argue with Elvis when he got that particular look in his eye. He muttered under his breath something about wasted time in public relations, but he didn't push it. Joe and Red exchanged a quiet glance, a silent nod of understanding. They knew the side of Elvis, the side that was more than just the king of rock and roll, the side that remembered his roots, that valued simple decency and respect above all else. Outside, the procession continued its solemn march. Elvis watched his famous face unreadable. He wasn't thinking about record sales or concert venues. He was just watching, letting the quiet sorrow of the moment wash over him. He knew this feeling, this profound loss. And in that moment, he wasn't Elvis Presley, the biggest star in the world. He was just a man quietly paying his respects. The unscripted pause in his demanding day had begun, and it promised to be more meaningful than any meeting on his schedule. The limousine sat silently by the curb, a hulking black shadow under the Memphis sun. Inside, the air conditioning hummed, but it couldn't quite mute the sounds of the passing funeral procession. The low rumble of engines, the occasional sniffle carried on the breeze, the almost unbearable quiet of people moving through profound grief. Elvis watched, his gaze fixed on the line of cars. The hearse had already passed its dark presence, fading slowly into the distance. Now the family cars were moving past the limo's tinted windows. Could see faces blurred slightly by the glass, but the expressions were unmistakable. Sorrow, exhaustion, a deep, aching pain. He saw an elderly woman, her hair a wispy white halo, clutching a worn handkerchief to her mouth. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Beside her, a man, perhaps her son, drove with a rigid posture, his jaw clenched, tears streaming freely down his weathered cheeks. It was raw, unfiltered human emotion, and it struck Elvis deeply. Then his eyes caught a glimpse of another car, a dusty old sedan that looked like it had seen better days, but was polished clean for this solemn occasion. In the back seat, he saw a woman, perhaps in her late 40s or early 50s. Her face etched with a grief so profound, it seemed to pull at the very air around her. She was Martha. Her eyes, red-rimmed and swollen, stared blankly ahead, seeing nothing and everything at once. Beside her, a young boy, maybe 10 or 11 years old, sat rigidly. His small hand was tucked into hers, holding on tight. This was Jimmy. The boy's face was pale, his eyes wide and uncertain. A deep sadness in them that seemed too heavy for someone so young. He looked confused, lost, like he couldn't quite grasp the enormity of what was happening. Elvis felt a familiar ache in his own chest. He remembered that feeling. He remembered being a boy not much older than Jimmy, when his twin brother Jesse Garin passed away at birth. And then, years later, the devastating loss of his mother Gladys. The way the world seemed to tilt on its axis, the hollow emptiness that filled every corner of life. He knew that raw, exposed grief, it wasn't a performance. It was real, searing pain. He watched as Martha's head slowly turned, her gaze sweeping over the parked cars, perhaps just registering them as blurry shapes. For a split second, her eyes seemed to connect with his through the tinted glass. He knew she couldn't see him clearly, couldn't possibly know who was inside, but he felt a strange, quiet connection, a shared understanding of sorrow. Colonel Parker, who had finally put down his phone, noticed Elvis's intense focus. Sad business funerals, he mumbled, trying to make small talk. Perhaps sensing Elvis's mood always reminds you to appreciate what you've got. Elvis didn't respond directly. He was too absorbed. He saw the simple dignity of the procession, no grand displays, just a quiet, respectful farewell. He imagined the life of the person being buried. A life lived, perhaps without fame or fortune, but a life cherished by this family, leaving behind an unbearable void. It was a stark contrast to his own life, where every public move was scrutinized, every emotion oft just a part of the show. Her procession moved slowly, agonizingly. Slowly, each car that passed felt like another heavy beat of a sorrowful drum. Elvis found himself mesmerized, unable to look away. He wasn't bored or impatient. He was simply present, a silent witness to a deeply personal moment for this family. He pictured Martha, the lines of pain around her eyes. He imagined her quiet evenings, now so terribly empty. He thought of young Jimmy, trying to make sense of a world that had suddenly become so much colder. It was heartbreaking. He was Elvis Presley, the king, surrounded by luxury and power, but at this moment none of that mattered. He was just a human being watching other human beings suffer and feeling a profound, unshakable sense of connection to their pain. And as the last car of the procession slowly rumbled past, leaving the street strangely empty, a quiet but powerful idea began to form in Elvis's mind. He knew he couldn't simply drive away as if nothing had happened. He had to do something. He didn't know what yet, but he knew he couldn't leave this family to face their grief alone, not after witnessing it so intimately. The king had seen their sorrow, and his heart had been touched. The last car of the funeral procession had finally turned the corner, leaving the street clear, but echoing with an invisible silence. Sam, the driver, stirred, his hands already moving towards the ignition. Colonel Parker cleared his throat, pulling out his pocket watch. "All right, Elvis. Time to go. We've lost enough time as it is. We can still make up for it if Sam puts his foot down." But Elvis didn't move. He continued to stare at the empty street where the procession had just been. His mind was still filled with the images of Martha's pain-stricken face and Jimmy's wide, bewildered eyes. He felt a profound sense of unease, a feeling that simply driving away now would be wrong. It would be like turning his back on their sorrow. He turned to Colonel Parker, his blue eyes intense. "No, Colonel, we're not going yet." Colonel Parker's face creased with exasperation. "Not going? Elvis, what are you talking about? We have a schedule. RCA is waiting. This is not just a casual drive, son. This is business." "I know what it is, Colonel," Elvis said, his voice low but carrying an unmistakable edge of command. "And I know what that was. That was a family saying goodbye. And they need more than just a clear road." Joe Esposito and Red West exchanged glances. They knew this side of Elvis. When he got like this, there was no arguing with him. It was a rare mood, one that came from deep within him, from his humble beginnings and his profound empathy. "What exactly do you propose, Elvis?" Colonel Parker asked, trying to keep his voice even, though his frustration was palpable. "Are you going to send them flowers? A card we can have. Joe arranged that later from the office." "No," Elvis said, shaking his head. "It's not about flowers or cards. It's about respect. It's about being human." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Did you see that woman? The one with the boy? She looked like she'd lost her whole world." "Elvis, with all due respect, you can't get involved with every sad story you see," the colonel argued, trying to be reasonable. "You're the king. You have responsibilities. You can't just stop your day for every funeral in Memphis." It was pretty heavy, that little kid." "Exactly," Elvis said, turning back to the colonel. "Think about it. We're sitting here in a custom Cadillac, living a life most people can't even imagine. And right there, that family is dealing with the hardest day of their lives. We saw it. We can't just pretend we didn't." Colonel Parker rubbed his temples. "So, what do you suggest? Elvis, are you going to go up to the church and crash the service? That would be a media circus. Imagine the headlines. Elvis interrupts funeral. We'd never live it down." "No. I'm not going to crash anything," Elvis said, a hint of steel in his voice. "I'm going to show respect, that's all. I'm going to offer comfort if I can, discreetly." He turned to Sam. "Sam, where did that procession go? Which church was it?" Sam, who had been listening quietly, answered without hesitation. "It's the First Baptist Church, Mr. Presley, just a couple of blocks from here." They usually take the main road after the procession. Okay, Elvis said, his plan solidifying in his mind. Sam, follow them. Drive slowly. Don't get too close, just close enough. And Colonel Joe read, "This stays quiet. No media, no fuss. This isn't for show. This is for them." Colonel Parker started to protest again, but Elvis held up a hand. "Colonel, I'm not asking. I'm telling. My mama taught me about respect. She taught me that when someone is hurting you, offer comfort. You don't turn your back, and that's what I'm going to do." His voice was calm now, but it had an unyielding firmness that often surprised people who only saw the flamboyant showman. "This is more important than any meeting, any photo shoot. This is about what's right." Seeing the absolute conviction in Elvis's eyes, Colonel Parker finally relented, though a worried frown remained on his face. "Elvis," he sighed, throwing his hands up in defeat. "But if this blows up in our faces, don't say I didn't warn you." Elvis didn't reply. He just nodded to Sam. "Let's go, Sam. Just follow them." Sam started the engine again, and the limousine slowly, deliberately pulled away from the curb. It wasn't a quick acceleration, not a rush to make up for lost time. It was a gentle, almost reverent movement, as if the mighty car itself understood the solemnity of its new purpose. Elvis leaned back in his seat, his gaze fixed forward, already anticipating the quiet act of humanity he was about to undertake. He knew it might be strange, might even be misunderstood, but in his heart he knew it was the only thing he could do. The limousine followed the path the funeral procession had taken, moving slowly a respectful distance behind. Sam kept the car just out of direct sight, ensuring they weren't intrusive but close enough to know where the family was heading. Soon the First Baptist Church came into view, its steeple reaching towards the heavens, a beacon of solace. Cars were already parked around the church, and a small group of mourners stood outside waiting. The hearse was at the entrance, and undertakers were carefully preparing to move the casket inside. Elvis watched, his heart heavy but resolute. "Sam, pull over here," Elvis instructed, pointing to a spot across the street, a little way down from the main entrance. "But still avoiding off. We'll wait," Colonel Parker grumbled, but said nothing. Joe and Red watched Elvis, sensing his determination. Elvis opened the car door. "I'm getting out." Colonel Parker's eyes widened. "Elvis? No. Are you insane? The public, the media. Someone will see you. This is exactly what I warned you about." "Colonel, I told you," Elvis said, his voice calm even as a flicker of defiance sparked in his eyes. "This isn't about being Elvis Presley, the king. This is about being a man. I'm not going to stand here quietly for a moment." Joe Esposito put a hand on Elvis's arm. Maybe just stay in the car. You don't want to draw attention to them on a day like this." "That's why I'm not walking right up to the front door, Joe," Elvis explained patiently. "I just want to be present from a distance to show respect, that's all. I owe them that after witnessing their grief." He looked at Joe, then at Red. "Just stand by me. Keep a lookout, but discreetly." Before anyone could protest further, Elvis stepped out of the limousine, the sunlight hidden, a stark contrast to the dim interior of the car. He adjusted his jacket, smoothed his hair, but there was no showmanship in his movements. He stood tall, his posture solemn, his gaze fixed on the church. He was a striking figure, even in a simple suit, his presence impossible to ignore, yet he carried himself with an unusual quietude. Across the street, a few people waiting outside the church entrance slowly turned their heads. A whisper started, then a few more eyes shifted. Disbelief flickered across faces. Was that really Elvis Presley? The murmurs grew, but they were still hushed, almost reverent, as if they knew this was not a moment for fanfare. Elvis, however, paid them no mind. His attention was solely on the church entrance. He watched as Martha and Jimmy emerged from one of the family cars, escorted by relatives. Martha's face was still pale, her shoulders slumped, but she walked with a fragile dignity. Jimmy, clinging to her hand, looked up at the large church doors with a mixture of apprehension and sorrow. As the undertakers began to carry the casket up the steps, Elvis took a deep breath. He took off his sunglasses, tucking them into his jacket pocket. His blue eyes, usually sparkling with life and mischief, were serious, filled with a profound empathy. He placed his right hand over his heart, a gesture of quiet respect. His head bowed slightly. He stood there unmoving, an iconic figure stripped of his usual glamour, reduced to a simple, respectful man. The air around him seemed to hum with the unspoken question of his presence. Why was he here? What did he intend? But for now he simply stood a silent sentinel, bearing witness to a private sorrow. The world had stopped for him too in that moment. The roaring crowds, the flashing cameras, the endless demands all faded into the background. There was only the solemn procession, the quiet grief of the family, and his own unwavering decision to honor it. Joe and Red stood a few paces behind him, their faces serious, understanding the weight of the moment. Colonel Parker remained in the limo, a frustrated but resigned figure, watching the strange, unscripted scene unfold. Elvis watched as the casket, adorned with a simple spray of white lilies, was slowly, carefully carried through the church doors. Martha followed, her hand still clutching Jimmy's, their figures small and vulnerable against a grand entrance. As they disappeared inside, Elvis remained standing, his hand over his heart. He felt a deep sense of connection, a shared humanity. And then, a spontaneous, heartfelt impulse surged through him. An idea so pure and unexpected that it bypassed all logic and management concerns. He knew what he had to do next. It was a gesture he knew best, a gift from his very soul, and he knew somehow it would offer comfort where words could not. The church doors closed, swallowing the grieving family and the casket into its solemn embrace. The small crowd outside dispersed, some entering the church, others lingering respectfully. Elvis remained standing, his hand still over his heart, his gaze fixed on the quiet facade of the building. The murmur of recognition had died down, replaced by a hushed reverence. People seemed to understand. This wasn't a celebrity appearance. It was something else entirely. A soft breeze rustled the leaves in the trees overhead, and a lone bird chirped its song, a stark contrast to the heavy silence. Elvis felt the weight of the moment, the collective sorrow that lingered in the air. He knew the family was inside, facing their final farewell. He wanted to offer something more than just his silent presence. He wanted to give them comfort, a sliver of peace in their overwhelming grief. He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, a quiet determination shone in their depths. He didn't look at Joe or Red or back at the limo where Colonel Parker was surely pacing mentally. He just looked at the church, and then softly, almost imperceptibly at first, he began to sing. His voice, usually a powerhouse that could fill stadiums and make millions swoon, was now barely a whisper. It was a gospel hymn, an old familiar melody that had echoed through countless Southern churches for generations. He chose Amazing Grace, a song of hope and redemption, a song about finding peace in the midst of turmoil. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. His voice was pure, unadorned by instruments or stage effects. It was simply Elvis the man singing from his soul. The sound was soft, intended not for a performance, but as a private offering. A heartfelt prayer sent across the street. The few people still lingering outside the church, those who hadn't gone in yet, froze. They slowly turned their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief. A few tears welled in their eyes as they recognized the iconic voice, stripped bare of all its famous trappings, pouring out raw emotion. The power of his voice, even whispered, was undeniable. It carried across the street a gentle wave of comfort. Inside the church, the service was underway, but the faint strains of the hymn could be heard, subtle yet profound. Martha, sitting in the front pew, her head bowed, felt a strange sensation. A melody, faint but familiar, seemed to drift into her consciousness. It wasn't part of the service, not the organ or the choir. It was a man's voice, rich and deep, singing a song she knew by heart. She looked up confused. But the beauty of the sound, even muffled, brought a fresh wave of tears to her eyes, not of sorrow, but of something else. A strange, unexpected comfort. Young Jimmy, sitting beside her, fidgeting with his tie, also heard it. He stopped, his brow furrowed. He recognized the song from Sunday school. He couldn't place the voice, but it was so beautiful, so calming. For a moment, his fear and confusion seemed to lessen, replaced by a quiet wonder. He leaned his head against his mother's arm and for the first time that day felt a tiny flicker of peace. Elvis continued to sing, his eyes still fixed on the church. He wasn't looking at the small crowd that had gathered on the sidewalk, their expressions rapt. He was singing for Martha. He was singing for Jimmy. He was singing for the person who had passed, and for all those who grieved. His voice was filled with empathy, with a deep understanding of loss, and with a sincere wish for solace. Through many dangers, toils, and snares I have already come. 'Tis grace has brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. He sang the verses, slowly, deliberately, each word infused with meaning. It was an act of profound respect, a spontaneous, selfless gift from a man who usually gave his voice to millions for adoration, but now gave it freely for just a few, for solace. When he finished the last note, the sound lingered in the air, a gentle echo before fading into the quietness of the street. He stood for another moment silent, his head still slightly bowed. Then he slowly lifted his head, opened his eyes, and looked towards the church one last time. He hoped, he truly hoped, that his small offering had reached them, that it had offered some tiny measure of peace. He took a deep breath, and then, turning, he started to walk slowly back towards the limousine, leaving behind an indelible mark on the hearts of those who had witnessed his extraordinary act of empathy. As Elvis turned to walk back to the limousine, the small group of onlookers on the sidewalk remained frozen, their eyes wide with awe. No one moved. No one spoke. The memory of his voice, pure and haunting, still hung in the air. He reached the limo, and Sam, without a word, opened the door. Colonel Parker was peering out, a mixture of disbelief and grudging admiration on his face. Joe and Red were already by the door, ready to usher Elvis in. But Elvis didn't get in. He paused. The large double doors began to open. The funeral service was over. A wave of people began to emerge, their faces solemn. And then he saw them. Martha, her eyes still red, but with a surprising trace of strength. Young Jimmy, still clinging to her hand, but looking a little less lost than before. They were making their way down the steps, moving towards a parked car. Without a moment's hesitation, Elvis made another decision. "Wait," he murmured to his entourage, his eyes fixed on Martha and Jimmy. He took a few steps forward, moving closer to the church, but still keeping a respectful distance from the main flow of people. Martha and Jimmy, still caught in the somber cloud of their grief, were halfway down the steps when Martha's eyes, almost by accident, drifted towards the street. And then she saw him. Elvis Presley, standing there, not in a crowd of fans, not on the stage, but quietly, respectfully watching her, her breath hitched. Disbelief warred with a strange, undeniable sense of connection. Had she imagined the song? Had it been him? Elvis slowly approached them, his steps measured and gentle. He wasn't rushing, not invading their space. When he was just a few feet away, he stopped. He didn't smile, not in his usual dazzling way. His expression was one of profound empathy and quiet sorrow. "Mrs., I'm so sorry for your loss," he said, his voice soft, deeper than it was when he sang. Almost a murmur. His famous charisma was there, but it was channeled into pure human kindness. Martha stared at him, unable to form words. She had recognized his voice. She realized it had been him, the king, singing Amazing Grace outside her husband's funeral. It was too much to process. Elvis gently reached out a hand, not to shake hers, but to lightly touch her arm, a comforting gesture. "I was passing by," he explained, though he knew she knew it was more than just passing by. and I saw the procession. I wanted to offer my respects. Your husband, he must have been a good man to be loved so much." Martha finally found her voice, a choked whisper. "Mr. Presley, I don't know what to say. The song was that you?" Elvis offered a small, sad smile. "Yes, ma'am, just a little comfort if I could. I know how hard it is to lose someone you love. My mama, she's gone too. My heart goes out to you." His eyes softened as he looked at Jimmy. "And to you, son." He knelt down, getting to eye level with Jimmy. The boy was still clutching his mother's hand, his eyes wide, staring at Elvis. "It's tough right now, isn't it, sport?" Elvis said gently. "But your papa, he'll always be with you right here." He gently tapped Jimmy's chest over his heart. "In your memories, in the love he gave you, that never goes away." Jimmy, overwhelmed, could only nod, tears silently tracing paths down his cheeks. Elvis reached into his inner jacket pocket. Not for money, not for an autograph. He pulled out a small polished wooden cross on a simple leather string. It looked old, worn, cherished. "My mama gave me this when I was a boy," he said, his voice low and reverent. "It's brought me comfort many times. It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's always hope and love." He gently pressed it into Jimmy's small hand. Martha gasped softly, her eyes welling up again. This was more than money, more than fame. This was a piece of his heart, a sacred offering. "Thank you, Mr. Presley," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for everything, for waiting, for the song, for this." She gestured vaguely at the cross in Jimmy's hand. "You have no idea what this means." Elvis stood up, his gaze holding hers. "You don't have to thank me, ma'am. It was an honor. Just remember, the love never dies, and take care of each other." He gave Jimmy a soft, encouraging smile, then nodded respectfully to Martha. Then, with a final compassionate nod, Elvis turned and walked back towards his waiting limousine, leaving Martha and Jimmy standing there stunned, holding onto a small wooden cross and an unforgettable memory. Joe in red had kept a discreet distance, making sure no one else approached. Colonel Parker, watching from the limo, just shook his head, a mixture of disbelief and a strange, quiet understanding dawning in his eyes. What Elvis had just done was entirely unscripted, entirely from the heart and completely undeniably respectful. Martha stood frozen on the trip steps, Jimmy still clutching her hand, the small wooden cross warm in his palm. The black limousine, a silent giant, smoothly pulled away, disappearing around the corner as quickly as it had arrived. The crowd of mourners, now slowly dispersing, cast curious glances their way. Whispers, hushed and disbelieving, followed Elvis's departure. Was that really him?" a cousin asked, approaching Martha with wide eyes. "Elvis Presley. Why was he here?" Martha couldn't speak for a moment. Her mind was reeling. King of rock and roll, the biggest star in the world, had not only stopped his busy schedule for her husband's funeral, but he had sung for them. And then he had knelt down and given her son a personal, cherished memento. It felt like a dream, too surreal to be real. Yet the weight of the cross in Jimmy's hand and the lingering scent of Elvis's cologne in the air told her it was true. Yes, Martha finally managed. Her voice still a whisper. She looked down at Jimmy, who was staring at the cross, his small face still tear-stained, but now touched with a flicker of wonder. He stopped for us. He sang Amazing Grace. And he gave Jimmy this." The cousin gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Good heavens, Martha, what a thing to happen on a day like this. Other family members gathered around, their faces a mixture of sorrow and awe. The overwhelming grief that had consumed them all day suddenly had a strange counterpoint, a moment of incredible, unexpected kindness. Later, at the quiet reception back at Martha's small house, the story spread like wildfire, but in hushed tones, almost reverently. No one wanted to sensationalize it. It was too precious, too personal. He just stood there so respectfully. Uncle Thomas recounted, his voice thick with emotion. And then he sang. I swear it was the most beautiful sound I ever heard, just for us. Young Jimmy sat quietly at the kitchen table, clutching the wooden cross. He didn't really understand who Elvis Presley was in the grand scheme of the world, but he understood kindness. He understood the warmth of a gentle hand, the comfort of a soft voice, and the feeling that someone, a stranger, cared about his pain. Cross felt like a shield against the vast cold emptiness of losing his father. It felt like a promise that things would be okay, somehow. Martha watched him, a tiny, fragile smile forming on her lips for the first time that day. Profound sorrow was still there. A heavy cloak draped over her heart, but beneath it, a quiet warmth had begun to glow. Elvis's act hadn't erased their grief, but it had softened its sharp edges. It had shown them that even in their darkest hour, there was light, there was human compassion, there was a profound sense of respect from an unlikely source. The media thankfully hadn't picked up on the incident. It was a brief, almost invisible moment on a quiet Memphis street. A few whispers might have circulated, a few fleeting mentions, but no newspaper headlines, no breaking news. Elvis had wanted it private, and for the most part it remained a sacred, shared memory among the grieving family and the handful of lucky witnesses. For Martha, the memory of Elvis's kindness would forever be intertwined with the memory of her husband's funeral. It wasn't a distraction from her loss. It was a profound affirmation of humanity in the face of it. It made a day of unbearable sadness somehow bearable, imbued with a touch of grace. It was a reminder that even the biggest stars could be the most grounded, the most human. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across her living room, Martha finally felt a sliver of peace. Her husband was gone, but his farewell had been touched by something extraordinary, something that spoke of true respect, not just for a famous man, but for a simple family in their moment of need. It was a gift, a blessing, whispered from a king to a grieving heart, and it would resonate within them for a lifetime. Back in the limousine, the journey resumed, the powerful engine purring as Sam expertly navigated the Memphis streets. But the atmosphere inside the car was vastly different from before. The hurried efficiency had been replaced by a quiet contemplation. Colonel Parker was uncharacteristically silent, staring out the window. He was a man of schedules, contracts, and public image, and what Elvis had just done defied all of his professional instincts. Yet watching the scene unfold, seeing the raw emotion on Martha's face, even he had felt a flicker of something beyond business. Well, the colonel finally muttered, breaking the silence. That was certainly unexpected. Elvis, let's just hope no one important saw it. Could have been a disaster for PR. Elvis, leaning back in his seat, his eyes closed, didn't open them. It wasn't about PR, Colonel. It was about being a human being. His voice was calm, almost peaceful. It felt right. It was the only thing I could do after seeing their pain. Joe Esposito, who had seen Elvis in countless moods and situations, nodded slowly. You know, E, when you sang that hymn, it was like being in church again. Just you and God, it was powerful. Red West, a man of few words, simply grunted in agreement. Nobody else could have done that, E. Not like you did it. It was real. Elvis finally opened his eyes, a soft, thoughtful expression on his face. You know, when I was a kid growing up in Tupelo, then moving to Memphis, funerals were a big deal. The whole community would stop. F-ah. He thought of the look on Martha's face, the bewildered sadness in Jimmy's eyes. He thought of the little wooden cross, a simple token, but one filled with genuine feeling. It had been his mother's, a constant comfort in his own life. Giving it away had felt like shedding a piece of himself, but in the best possible way it felt right. That boy, Elvis continued almost to himself. He looked so lost. My mama, when she died, I felt like the world had stopped. It's a feeling that never truly leaves you. I hoped I could give him a little bit of comfort, a little bit of hope. Colonel Parker cleared his throat. I suppose it was a kind gesture for you, but we have to make sure it doesn't become a habit. Elvis? You're Elvis Presley? You can't just stop in the middle of traffic to sing for every grieving family? Elvis chuckled. Don't worry, Colonel. It's not going to be a habit, but sometimes you just know what you have to do. What your heart tells you. He looked out the window again, the city speeding by a blur of familiar sights. His mind, however, was still back at the church with Martha and Jimmy. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction, a quiet peace that went beyond the usual thrill of a successful concert or a platinum record. This wasn't about fame or money. It was about a simple act of humanity, a connection forged in a moment of shared sorrow. It was about respect, given freely and without expectation. Closed his eyes again, not in weariness but in contemplation. The day had been long and filled with demands, but this unexpected detour, the spontaneous act of kindness, had been the most meaningful part of it all. It reminded him that beneath the dazzling costumes and the roaring crowds, he was still just Elvis, a boy from the South who believed in God, family, and the power of a simple, heartfelt gesture. King had taken a pause from his kingdom to step into the world of ordinary sorrow, and in doing so, he had found a deeper connection to himself and to the true meaning of compassion. The road ahead was still long filled with countless obligations, but for Elvis, the memory of that quiet street and that simple hymn would serve as a powerful reminder of what truly mattered in life. Years passed as they always do, turning days into weeks, weeks into months, and months into a quiet tapestry of memories. Elvis Presley continued his reign as the king of rock and roll, his fame only growing, his music reaching every corner of the globe, played to sold-out arenas, recorded hit after hit, and became an even greater legend. His life was a whirlwind of glitter, adoration, and relentless demands. But for all the public spectacle, for Elvis himself, the quiet memory of that day in Memphis when his limo was blocked by a funeral remained vivid. It wasn't a moment he spoke about often, not publicly. It was too personal, too sacred. But in quiet conversations with Joe Esposito or Red West, he would sometimes bring it up, recalling the faces of Martha and young Jimmy, the simple dignity of the procession, the pure feeling of singing that hymn for no one but them. It was a touchstone, a reminder of what truly mattered beyond the bright light. It reinforced his belief in the power of a single act of kindness, of genuine respect. And for Martha and Jimmy, that day became a story they would tell. Not loudly, not boastfully, but quietly, with reverence to family members and trusted friends. It was their secret miracle. A profound moment that had softened the sharp edges of their overwhelming grief. Jimmy grew up. He went through the tough years of adolescence, missing his father every day. But he never forgot the man who had knelt down and given him that small polished wooden cross. He kept it always first in his pocket, then on his bedside table, a tangible link to a moment of grace. Whenever life felt overwhelming, whenever the grief for his father resurfaced, he would hold the cross, and a sense of peace, a quiet strength, would wash over him. He learned to play the guitar too, not like Elvis, but enough to strum out simple melodies. And sometimes late at night he would hum Amazing Grace, remembering the voice that had comforted him on the darkest day of his life. Martha, strong and resilient, continued to live her life, cherishing the memory of her husband. The story of Elvis's kindness was woven into the fabric of her family's history. It became a testament to the unexpected good in the world, a reminder that even the most famous people could possess the deepest humility and empathy. It taught them that true respect wasn't about status or wealth, but about seeing another human being's pain and offering comfort, no matter who you were. Years later, long after Elvis had passed away, becoming an even greater legend, Jimmy, now a grown man with children of his own, visited Graceland. He didn't go as a fan, though he admired Elvis's music. He stood at the gates, looking at the mansion, remembering the black limo, the quiet street, and the man who had stepped out of his world to touch theirs. He didn't try to get a special tour or tell his story to strangers. He just stood there, silently, respectfully, appreciating the man who had given him hope when he needed it most. The legacy of Elvis Presley was immense, a revolution in music, an unparalleled cultural impact. But for a few, for Martha and Jimmy, his legacy was also a quiet, profound act of kindness on a simple Memphis street. It was the king, not in glittering jumpsuit and flashing lights, but in a quiet suit, singing a hymn, offering a hand of comfort and a cherished cross. It was a story about respect, the kind that comes from the heart, the kind that truly matters, the kind that echoes through generations, a testament to the enduring power of human compassion. And it showed that even a king, especially a king, could find his deepest purpose in the simplest, most respectful gesture.